Everybody, we're ready to start our introduction to the Jain tradition, and you could pronounce that Jainism or Jainism. So to begin with the presentation, let me share the screen and let me go over here to our lesson plan. And there we go. Yay, we're here. Okay, so we'll start off with the word, what it means. We'll start off with the symbols. We'll start off with the numbers, its locations. All of that's very important introduction material. So here we have the word Jain. In a Jain or Jain, you could pronounce it either or. It's really kind of a combination in Indian language. It's a Jain, like that. It is one who follows a Jina. And a Jina is believed to be somebody who's conquered samsara, somebody who is enlightened, somebody who's recognized as what they call kind of a Jain saint in that way. And the symbol for Jainism oftentimes is the hand with the circle here. And inside there is written in Sanskrit, ahimsa. And so the wheel or the circle represents samsara, and we can stop samsara by practicing ahimsa. Now, ahimsa is an Indian word that simply means nonviolence or compassion. It is the foundation of this Jain tradition. In order to attain moksha, in order to get out of samsara, one and the same, one has to practice ahimsa. It's a requirement. It is part of Indian thought. It is part of Hindu thought, but it's never been more pronounced and more significant in any Indian tradition as it has been in Jainism. Jainism is the one that really captures the essence of the concept of ahimsa. So understanding what the word Jain means, understanding the symbol in terms of when it was founded and where it's located and how many are there in the world. Those are good questions. So it started about 2,500 years ago, at least. Now I say at least because we can trace it back at least that far, maybe a little earlier. It goes back to the time of the beginning of Buddhism and back to the time of the beginning of the Upanishad period. So that's 2,500 years ago, as we learned about when we covered Hinduism. Just like the Buddhists, the Jains step outside of the Hindu fold because they do not honor the Vedas. They have their own set of scriptures. They have their own philosophy, which pulls from Hinduism. It has the idea of moksha, samsara, karma, reincarnation. A lot of classic Indian philosophy themes are in Jainism. The whole paradigm is more or less the same, but they add a few differences with Hinduism. It really sets them apart. One, I mentioned the Vedas, but another one is they reject the caste system. They reject that concept of society. It could be structured based on different castes or place in society, and that certain castes can be spiritually more honored and closer to moksha than other castes, and all that kind of connection with the caste system is rejected by both of those traditions. So that's one thing that really sets it apart. Now, in terms of where Jains are in the world and the numbers of Jains in the world, it is a smaller world religion. We know that Hinduism is way up there as the third largest religion and almost like 1 billion followers. We know that Buddhism is way up there as an Eastern religion with about 500 million or 500 million. And then we're going to go down, way down in numbers to the Jain numbers. And the Jain numbers is about 5 to 7 million. It's much smaller. It's predominantly in India. It's not necessarily all around the world. There are pockets of Jains. We have Jains in Southern California. We have a Jain temple near Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park. Yes, there are Jains. I have students who have been Jains, but you're not going to find a very strong, large community in your next door, in your backyard or anything like that. It's much smaller, a little bit more located in India. Again, with the world as it is and the pluralism that we experience, there are religions all around us, and Jains will be part of that. It's just that in terms of number, you won't find as many. It will be more of a rarity for you to locate a Jain near you. Now, the Jains, I mentioned where they live, and I mentioned the numbers are much smaller. So let's start up here and understand, how it started and what are their beliefs and their main principles here are the two things I'm going to focus on in today's Zoom. So number one, the major person that you need to understand is Mahavira. Mahavira was possibly a contemporary of the Buddha. The Buddha, it said when he, and we'll cover Buddhism soon enough, but when he was raised as a prince, and so was Mahavira, there's going to be a lot of parallels here. When Buddha was around the age of 30, he left his kingdom in exploration for a spiritual journey, in exploration for enlightenment. And the same with Mahavira, very parallel stories here. The fact that they're so parallel, some people wondered if those stories blended together and are layered upon each other, possibility. But it is said that when the Buddha left his kingdom, he practiced for many years asceticism. He practiced self-denial. He practiced, self-restriction, and he wouldn't eat very much. He would practice very austerities. And it's argued that possibly he practiced among some kind of Jain teachers. And so not that he practiced with Mahavira, that's not what's being argued, but simply that Jainism might predate Buddhism. It may not necessarily be as contemporary as we think. It may predate. And if you were a Jain, you wouldn't say the founder of Jainism is Mahavira. That's more the academic take. That, in fact, Jainism predates Mahavira all the way back to the beginning of time. It's rather that he was the last of a long line of Jain teachers or Jain or Jinas, or those who have conquered samsara. He's the last of a long line. And so they recognize 24 of them. They're called Tirthankaras or Jinas or Jain saints. And not that they're the only 24, it's just that these are recognized in history from the Jain's perspective. But the last one was Mahavira. So when I'm saying the founder of Jainism is Mahavira, that position will be countered by a believer's perspective. We're not trying to do an injustice, to the believer's perspective there. It's just understanding that when you're going back, they're going to trace some of those Jain saints back millions of years, and we cannot go that far back in time. That becomes then ahistorical, and we're viewing it as more mythological in that sense, or symbolic. Now, of those 24 Jain saints, it's interesting that the one predating Mahavira was in a historical time period around the 9th century BCE. That is Parsva, and Parsva might have actually been historical because it's argued that Mahavira was raised in a Jain family. His parents were Jain. He himself is the one that sprang out of that experience and became one of the leading spokespersons for the Jain movement. So in other words, was he the founder? Was he not? We're so kind of in the Western mindset, usually stuck with the idea that there's one person that founded it. When we're going that far back in history, we're only we're kind of like playing detective work and trying to figure out what happened, not necessarily 100% knowing. It seems to be Mahavira possibly was real, and there may have been a teacher before him a couple centuries earlier, and Jainism might have been part of Indian thinking, of India mindset at that time, Jain philosophy, and that Mahavira is the one that really springboards it forward and really solidifies the teachings in a much more succinct way. So I hope that made sense to you. But if I was to ask you who's the founder of Jainism from an academic perspective, we would then check off Mahavira there. Okay, so putting this softly down so I don't do a big bang with my teacup. It's interesting that some Jains recognized one of the 24 Jinas as a woman, and that would be the 19th, and that was from one of the branches of Jainism that does that. So the idea that a female can also be recognized as one who's conquered, one who has attained moksha, one who's gotten out of samsara is quite significant and says a lot about how they understand what a female is and the value of the female, and it's not in a degraded position, but a very honored one. So Mahavira, let's go a little bit deeper into his life. So it's kind of interesting, his biography. I did a film on Mahavira, and my film on YouTube on Mahavira, I've produced at least 3 Jain films. I think I have 4 right now, but the 3 that I assigned for you guys, one is on the life of Mahavira, one is on the teaching of ahimsa, and one is on the teachings of Anikantavada, those 2 Jain principles I mentioned. But the one on the life of Mahavira, I was surprised that one has more hits than any film I've ever put up on YouTube. It's insane how many, I forgot the number, but it's really a large number. And I almost want to say 200,000, I'm not sure. It was 100,000 and then it surpassed that, and it's just way up there. I hope I'm not misquoting my numbers. But anyway, so Mahavira, I think the reason why it's such a popular film, there's not that much out on the life of Mahavira on YouTube. So I think there was a desire for having a film on him. There's a lot on the Buddha, there's a lot of the different religious heroes, but when Mahavira, when you search for that, you don't find that much. So as I said, he's viewed as somebody who was raised in a wealthy experience, raised in a kingly environment, raised as a prince. There's two branches of Jainism that we're going to talk about, and one branch sees his biography a little bit differently than the other branch, but I'm going to work with the majority view here. The branch is called the Shvetambras, and I'll explain that in a minute. But they view him as somebody who was married, who even had a daughter. I'm trying to think of how to pronounce her name. I say it in the film. It's such a hard Indian name to say. But he has a daughter and eventually decides to leave and go on a spiritual quest and leave his daughter and his wife behind, just like the Buddha had a son and left them behind, goes on a spiritual quest. And while on that spiritual quest, he decides to practice asceticism and practice self-denial in that sense where, you know, even they said that he left and his clothes were ripped and he didn't even replace them. So he's now clothesless, walking around. He concentrates on meditation. He concentrates on living a simple life. He concentrates on harming the least possible. Actually, ahimsa is trying to live a life of compassion to the utmost level where not even an insect is harmed. It's said when you read about the life of the Mahavira in their actual literature, the Jain scriptures, which is called, and I have it right here, the Jain Agamas or the Jain Sutras, right here, the main scriptures. When you read about the life of Mahavira, it's said that every step he takes, he watched where he walked. Everything that he did, he made sure nothing was killed, nothing was harmed. Indeed, we are always scratching our face and little microbes are dying. We are stepping and little things are being squished. But to the best of his ability, to the best of his intention, that was minimized or prevented. And so some Jains, you will see them wearing a mask, okay, and to not inhale insects. Now we all wear masks for other reason, not to inhale viruses. But Mahavira, his biography is very interesting to hear about. And when you watch that film, that's when you learn about kind of this fascinating kind of religious hero in the biography that is portrayed for him. Okay, moving here, I mentioned the 24 Tirthankars or Jinas. This, if you wanted to do an interesting parallel here, there's some philosophies that we'll learn about in this class, some religions that have this concept of a lineage, and then there's the last one that they honor. And it reminds me a lot of Islam. Islam has this idea there's multiple prophets. They recognize Jesus as a prophet. They recognize Moses as a prophet, David as a prophet, etc. And you're going to go through that lineage of prophets, and then you're going to get to the final prophet, Muhammad. And so if you're Islamic, you would say peace be upon him after that. So it kind of reminds me of that. Not that Jainism and Islam has a historical connection or philosophically are similar. It's just that idea of the lineage and then the final one that is thus been recognized as historical. Okay, so moving here, I have two important Jain principles to discuss with you. And one is the principle of ahimsa and one is the principle of anikantavada. Now, I already mentioned ahimsa a little bit. And let me cover anikantavada, and then I'll go back to ahimsa when I get to their vows. So this is a fascinating Jain principle, and I love it. It's just one of my favorite concepts out of all of the world religions. I have admiration for every world religion. I see beauty in all of them, but this one principle concept I think that reigns supreme for me is anikantavada. And what is that principle? So drink a sip of tea before I begin on this one. Okay, anikantavada means not one-sided. It means multiple perspectives. And it's the idea that an intelligent human being would realize there's always kind of different angles to look at something, always multiple positions to take, and that nobody had a commodity on truth, and that a myopic worldview is the opposite of anikantavada. They have a beautiful story to kind of captures this, the analogy. And I use this analogy in the very beginning of the first reading for the semester, and that's in How Scholars Study the Sacred, and that's the elephant story. And the elephant story is anikantavada. It's the idea the story could be told as 3 blind men, 5 blind men, 7 blind men, that doesn't matter. But these blind men go and they go to this elephant and experience the elephant and report back to the king what they experienced. And each reports back a different tale. Each are correct in their own right. Each have some value to offer, but each are incorrect in some ways because they can learn from the other. And it kind of is a beautiful philosophy for a world religions class. Like the theme of the course can actually be anikantavada. The idea that all the religions have some kind of interesting insight to our psychology, some kind of interesting mythology or rituals or doctrines that we can all kind of garner some value from. And yet just only understanding one, we lose the value of all the others. And so Anikandavada, I always start off my world religions class when I teach it on campus. I always start off with that concept of Anikandavada is the main theme of the course, is realizing that there's so much value in learning from each other, and that that dogma thinking that I have the truth and everybody else is wrong, then you lose out on all that interesting insights that we can learn from each other. So Anikandavada is a really open approach, and it's a really eclectic approach, and it's a very multicultural, perspective approach. Okay, so that is an interesting concept of Jainism, that there, of all the religions, that's the one that I noticed it's highlighted the most, is that idea of learning from each other and moving away from myopic dogmatic thinking. Okay, ahimsa, I have to add one caveat though before I get out. One caveat is that the one multiple approach they won't like wrap their arms around and say, hey, let's also entertain that one, is one that deals with violence. So any position that's going to hold one that's counter to ahimsa is not going to be part of that multi-perspectivism. If any philosophy is advocating killing or hurting or pain or suffering to others, that would not, and that's not part of that Anikandavada umbrella for the Jain. So that has to be added in there. So ahimsa is embraced as one of the 5 vows. Ahimsa, as we know, is compassion, nonviolence, and the Jains, you could describe this as 5 vows. They also, if you can detail a little bit more, sometimes they're described as 12 vows, but I just go with a simple 5. It's very easy for us to grasp. And the 5 vows, vow number 1, the most important vow of all the vows is ahimsa. It's the foundation of this tradition. And it is a vow that all Jains take, whether you're monastic and you are taking the monastic vows, or whether you are a lay person with a family and a job and so forth. Everybody is going to be practicing ahimsa. And it impacts the job one has, it impacts one's diet to a huge extent. I'll explain that in a minute. It deals with how we relate to other animals in the world, how we walk in the world, everything related to our lives. So number 1, how it impacts your job. If you're a lay person and you have a job, you would avoid certain careers. You would avoid working in a butcher shop. You would avoid working in a slaughterhouse. You would avoid working in the army. You would avoid working as one of those pest controller guys that go and spray the bugs around your house. You would avoid any job that dealt with death, pain, and suffering. And so another job that they do avoid there is being a farmer. And you think, what's wrong with farming? Because when you till the soil, you have to pull up insect life out of the ground, and a lot of it dies. So as much as possible, go for a career, they would argue, that doesn't deal with himsa or violence, but with ahimsa or nonviolence. And so certain careers that they're very well known to go into, they are going to medicine, any jobs that helps prevent pain and suffering. They go into, a lot of their jobs are dealing with, they think, are non-karmic jobs, or jobs that don't reap bad karma for them, because any kind of job that deals with killing would for them. So it could be a professor, it could be a doctor, it could be a lawyer, it could be somebody who works with jewelry, it could be somebody who works in the banking system, as long as you're not dealing with the actual act of taking life in any way. Okay. In terms of their diet, all Jains are vegetarian, and that is across the board to be a practicing Jain. Now you say, well, are there some pockets of Jains that eat meat? Then they're not a practicing Jain. So a practicing Jain is definitely going to follow the vegetarian diet. They're not vegan. Some people may ask why, and this is an Indian philosophy, and because the cow is treated with utmost respect as kind of a holy mother, that's the thinking of Indian philosophy, and not treated in an abusive situation. So when they're taking the milk from the cow, it's the cow giving to her children, and not the cow in the situation that we might be witnessing in our dairy farms today. And they avoid certain foods that, this is kind of interesting, they're all vegetarian. Some of them take it to a different level than others. So some will avoid eating vegetables that you have to pull from the ground. You have to pull the roots from the ground. And I believe that would be like a potato. And the reason why is because you're pulling from the ground, just like the farmer, the insect life around it is being harmed. What else did I want to say? And again, it's all within, what allows one to the best of their ability kind of thing. Of course, there's going to be little things, you're eating salad and there's a little insect you didn't catch when you washed off the lettuce, stuff like that. That happens, but it's to the best of your ability to practice compassion and nonviolence in everything you do. And then helping animals. So they're known in India for being very involved in animal shelters and going to rescue animals and going to take care of animals. Ironically, this religion is one of the wealthiest religions in India, even though some of the monastics take the vow of owning nothing. But the lay people tend to be quite successful in India because the careers that they go into tend to be more profitable just by chance. They go into the professional fields of like professors and doctors and lawyers and so forth. And so they give a lot of that money back. Most of the charity work that's given in India, even there's a small group in India, 5 to 7 million, most of the charity work comes from, or I'm sorry, not charity work, but charity financial help really comes from the Jains. Now, some Jain monastics, not necessarily the lay people, but some Jain monastics, when they walk down the street, they will sweep the ground before they walk to make sure they don't step on anything. And the lay person would probably not carry that broom, but certainly watch where they walk, not walking on anthills, not consciously stepping on creatures as they're going. Okay, all Jains take a vow not to steal, and that is to have an honest living. And that's a kind of a neat one, because one of the reasons why you can help explain why the Jains are so successful in India and so successful in their careers is they're viewed as very honest. So if you have a choice to go buy something from a Jain or a non-Jain, you're going to go, I'm thinking I'm going to buy it from the Jains. I know they're not going to rip me off. So that honest living really serves them well, of not stealing, not taking what's not theirs. That same philosophy is also part of Buddhism. A lot of these vows are also in Buddhism when we look at the Eightfold Path, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Okay, not to lie. So Jains are told one of their vows is to always honor the truth and never to slander, never to gossip, never to speak. And I spelled that wrong. I don't know why I wrote that. I'll correct that today. With violence with your words, always to be gentle in speech, always to be compassionate through your words and so forth. So that's also a neat vow that they take. Now these last two, no sexual misconduct and non-attachment to worldly things, even though all Jains take it, level number 4 and 5, the level you take it to depends upon if you're monastic or a layperson. So no sexual misconduct. So you can have a family, you can have a wife and a husband, and you can have kids, all of that. Sexuality can be viewed as quite normal in that sense. But no sexual misconduct. So no affairs and no, anything out of like the norm of the husband and the wife. And then in modern day times, the wife and the wife, the husband, all of that. Okay, so let's just say all of that, but that would be new to India at that time. Okay, and then monastic vows of celibacy for the monastic. So if you're monastic and you're taking that vow, you're taking it to the next level of completely being celibate and so forth. And then no attachment to worldly things, again, different. If you're a lay person, you're giving to charity, you're limiting your personal possessions. There's some Jain films of people, Jain families, they live a very simple life. Some of the families, they sleep on the floor with just a nice little blanket down. It's not, not that all Jains are doing that, but it's just that whole principle of simplifying your life and being a minimalist. That's kind of the concept. And from the monastics, it's different. They take the vow literally of owning nothing. And there's two branches of the Jains. One take it to the point of really owning absolutely nothing. So there's that nudity aspect, because if you have clothes and you're owning something. So we'll talk about those two branches right here. There's two major monastic branches. There's a few subdivisions, but these are the two big ones. And again, in an intro class, we'll just cover the basics. The Shvetambras and the Digambras. And the Shvetambras are the white clothed. The white clothes, you see they wear the white, they're ahead of their time wearing those white masks, okay? Again, for them, it's not to inhale and cause harm. It also represents never to lie and never to speak ill of somebody. So it's also representing it's kind of symbolic as well. Out of your mouth comes nothing but compassion. There are women monastics in this tradition. The female is also viewed as somebody who can become enlightened. They were the ones that recognized the 19th Tirthankara, the enlightened female. And they do not see nudity as essential. They do not practice nudity. Okay, so that's something to understand. There is a film I have in the lesson plan where a white clothed Shvetambra monk is being interviewed. Okay, and the Digambras argued that Mahavira was never, when he left his kingdom, he fully was unclothed, and he practiced the Digambra way of being sky clothed. What are you clothed by? You're clothed by the sky. You're not clothed by any material cottons or polyesters or anything like that, just the sky, your nudity. The monastic order, yes, there are Digambra female lay people, but they're not monastics. You will not have nudity among the females at all in India. And they're mainly located in southern India because that's where it's a lot warmer, a lot balmier weather. Northern India is very cold at times, so you're going to find the Digambras down there. And here you have a group of Digambras. The monastics will eat usually just once a day around 12 noon. They're not eating their 3 meals a day. Who's feeding them if they don't have kitchens and food and refrigerators and homes and stuff, because they own nothing? Who's feeding them are the lay people. So when they travel around, the Digambra lay people will feed them in southern India, and they consider it an honor to do so. Very good karma to feed the Digambra monastics. What else did I want to say in looking at this? The Shvetambras believe that Mahavira, when he left the kingdom, wore his white, representing simplicity and purity. And when he left his wife, when he left his wife and his family and left wearing clothes, eventually one day his clothes were torn. And yes, he did eventually practice nudity because he didn't replace them, but it's not something that they thought Mahavira advocated as essential. So they do not do that. So these are the two different, in the reading, I kind of highlight a little bit more detail on the differences between these two. So if you want to look at that, it's just like a one-page Shvetambra versus Digambra comparison. In this presentation, I'm just going over really the main essentials here. One thing to know that both of them will carry, though, even the Digambras own nothing, there is one little thing. They might have the broom, okay, to which to sweep when they walk as an essential not to cause harm. And they may have, I think it's for the Shvetambras, a begging bowl, like a bowl that you put out for food to be placed in. I believe the Digambras use their palm of their hand. Okay, and I said in the Ahimsa book, more details are there. So the layperson follows all 5 vows, and yes, okay. And moksha is the goal. Okay, so classic beliefs. The Jain tradition is not a theistic religion, so it is an atheistic religion or a transtheistic religion. And so when we define religion as a belief in God, that is incorrect. Religion is not a belief in God because there are religions that don't have that concept. That's a Western biased interpretation. Jainism and Buddhism are considered atheistic, meaning they don't have a theistic Godhead, but they have this idea of a transtheistic higher reality, higher states of consciousness. And the goal in Eastern philosophy in general is to get out of samsara, stop karma, and attain moksha. And that's the same goal with the Jains. The one thing the Jains kind of have been noted about them, which is kind of unusual, it's different, is that sometimes the monastics, when they're very old and they're at the end of their days and they know that they're soon to die, let's speak, they stop all activity. They stop all action to stop all karma, so that when they do die, they don't have any extra karma kind of to play out in their next life, that hopefully they clean the slate and can attain a higher state of consciousness. And so that idea of stopping all activity is unusual to us, but it's kind of the similar idea you sometimes see when somebody is, toward the end of life and they stop eating and they stop drinking. It's that same kind of concept. Okay, how do you attain moksha? Okay, no doubt meditation plays a role, but the number 2 principles here, asceticism, a big one, and ahimsa. And ahimsa is essential for spiritual liberation. It's not just a necessary sort of ingredient, it is the ingredient that the more compassionate you are, that's what I want to say, non-compassionate you are, the more bad karma you reap, and that keeps you in the cycle of birth and death. And very much the goal is to get out of it because of the pain and suffering connected to it. Asceticism, Buddhism, it said Buddha started his practice when he was first left the kingdom as an ascetic and rejects it and chooses the middle path. So the Jains and the Buddhists have a lot of similarity, but on that right here, they differ. They definitely differ. That Buddhism argues for the middle path, or the path of moderation. Okay, here is a very famous Jain symbol as well. Besides the hand with the circle and ahimsa in there, you have the swastika. And a lot of you may wonder, what the heck is a swastika doing there? If you go into a Jain temple, you go into certain Buddhist temples, you go into certain Hindu temples, you will see a swastika. And I want you to understand it has nothing to do with Hitler, that this is an ancient Sanskrit symbol. It is shaped differently than the Hitler Third Reich one. It's shaped in the opposite direction. I believe also Hitler's was tilted, I think, I'm not sure. I'm not a swastika aficionado, but I certainly know that this means well-being and prosperity and very positive things, and it doesn't mean anything negative. And it's kind of like a good luck symbol, and it goes back in India thousands of years. It goes back to the Greeks thousands of years. It goes back millennia upon millennia, cultures upon cultures, kind of have this universal symbol of the swastika. And sadly enough, in World War II, and Hitler took upon himself and twisted the shape of it and the meaning of it, and kind of, people say, kind of stole the swastika, because the swastika is supposed to have like nice Sanskrit, ancient Indian meanings. Okay, so I've been in restaurants before and I've seen the swastika up on the ceiling, and I know what it means, but I was thinking, gosh, if I didn't know what it meant, how weird that would be for me to see that. So if you ever are eating Indian food one day in a restaurant and you see that, or in a temple and you see that. Okay, so I have a mini lecture on Jainism, which covers a lot of what I said in a 5-minute summary. Required reading. I wrote a book, required reading, called Ahimsa. It's just a very brief guide, and I offer it to you for free or Audible. I have an article for you to read to understand their vegetarian diet. Now, this is not written about Jains. It's not written by a Jain. Rather, it's just written to explain why the Jains, like from, even though it's not about Jainism, but for you to understand and step phenomenologically into the shoes of the Jain to understand why they would not want to cause harm to other creatures. And so you can either read it or you could watch the film on it. So I offer, it's the same thing, the film or the reading of the article. And then there's supplementary articles here. I wrote my second Jain book I wrote called The Jain Path. It's right here. And if you wanted to read that, that could be also potential extra credit for you. Okay. Moving here, the required films. Okay, so these are my three. Where are they? My three are right here. And then this is the basic Jain introduction Meltsack put together. That's a cool one. And then there's a great documentary called Ahimsa. I cannot find it on the internet. It used to be there for free. They took it down because now they're making money on that film. But just to watch kind of like a trailer of it, and then the Oprah Belief series. This was put together by USC. There's a religious studies program there, and the chair of that program is the one that narrates that one. So that's pretty cool. And then what do I have here? If you wanted to watch the Ahimsa documentary part 2, I have a 15 minutes of that. So just the intro is here, and then later in the film, part 2, 15 minutes, they have that up. So hopefully this introduction to Jainism was enlightening to you and your post here. And it's really to talk about Ahimsa, pulling ideas from the reading, pulling ideas from the films, and then Nikantavada as well. And then I have the elephant picture there. So it's always kind of having you explain it, demonstrating you kind of did the material necessary to understand it, and then also applying it to you. The application is really kind of the best part, the fun part. Okay, thank you everybody. And I will give you my Jain hand symbol. Imagine there's a little circle with Ahimsa in there. And I will again close with the Indian greeting, Namaste. Thank you for watching. And let me stop share and end meeting.